Well, I'd love to welcome all of you this morning to this roundtable on mission-driven energy policy, the role of public-private sector collaboration. I'll be chairing this morning's session. I am Tanya Kumar, Director of Net Zero at the Confederation of British Industry, so a British business group that works with the business community in the United Kingdom to help support advance the transition, mobilise private sector finance, and work with the government on ambitious net zero policy. Today's session, the context for it is looking at the UK's Clean Power 2030 mission, an ambitious mission that we have set to drive ourselves forward to meet our ambitious NDC goal as well that was announced at the beginning of this week. I am delighted that we are joined by Chris Stark, formerly Chief Executive of the UK's Climate Policy Watchdog, and now he has a newly created role as the Head of Mission Control for Clean Power 2030. It's a new role, a very important title, and we have had some jokes that it is sort of like he is running Stark Enterprises, for those that know the film series The Avengers. So Chris Stark is essentially heading up that unit for us in government. I'm also delighted that we are joined by Craig Dyke, Director of Systems Operations at the newly created National Energy Systems Operator. Just last week, they published a report in the UK on how we are going to achieve that 2030 decarbonised power system. And again, there are some really interesting statistics on how actually we're going to meet that challenge to achieve 2030. And Craig will be giving some remarks on actually how the NESO will be working with the government, but also the business community on actually accelerating that private sector investment, but also how do you work with the UK's energy system to actually deliver this step change. We'll then be hearing from Martin Pibworth, CCO of SSE, and Martin will be giving some reflections on how actually SSE is approaching this new framework that we're operating with in the United Kingdom. The main perspective of this roundtable is to actually share learnings of how we think this new mission approach to energy policy might function, and actually share learnings across different jurisdictions. This is a global challenge. I've been really taken by the conversations that I've been having with business groups across the globe. When they look at the UK, the first question they've been asking me is, it is great to see UK leadership back. How are you actually going to do this? There are a number of opportunities, but also there are so many systemic challenges actually that we face. And how are you approaching this? And how can we work together to lead by example? So without further ado, Chris, let me pass on to yourself to give some reflections of what it is like heading up mission control and what are the objectives for the UK.
Thanks so much, Tanya, and it's very good to do this in the UK Pavilion with headphones, because those of you who were at COP last year will know that we struggled a lot because the Brazilians were next to us and they were having a much better time than us, so it's great to do this here. And I was here at COP last year in a very different role, so I was the Chief Executive of the UK's Climate Change Committee, which, as you said, Tanya, is the watchdog that looks over the UK's progress on climate and gives advice on the targets that are set in the UK on reducing emissions. And the reason I'm doing the job I do now is because we did I think a very important piece of work in two stages to look at the transition that the whole of the UK economy is making to net zero. Back in 2021, we drew 5 different pathways to hit net zero, all of them entirely consistent within each pathway, exploring different routes to achieving net zero across the economy. So we had, for example, a pathway that looked very strongly at behaviour change. So we had the people of the UK responding more positively to the need to cut their own carbon. Another pathway that looked like a very rapid transition. Another pathway that looked at a more technologically led one, and one where we had more difficulty getting off fossil fuels, which is the pathway I think that we are following at the moment in the UK. What's interesting looking across those various scenarios for net zero is that you can look at the common factors across that, despite them being very different in their makeup. One of the features of every one of those scenarios is that there is a point in the 2030s when you can say that the power sector is clean. And we felt while we were at the Climate Change Committee, it was important that we named a date that was not in the 2040s for that, and that we didn't take an overly purist approach to what that meant. Because by the time we get to, let's say, the middle of the 2030s, it's very clear that you've reduced your use of gas in the power system to what is essentially a reserve capacity. You're using it only for the longer periods when the wind doesn't blow in those scenarios. So we give in 2021 a recommendation to government that they should set a clean power date of 2035 as a target. Boris Johnson, the then Prime Minister, picked that up and made that a pledge at a former COP in COP26 in my hometown of Glasgow. And around that time, Ed Miliband, who is now our new Energy Secretary and was here with the Prime Minister this week and will return next week, he began asking me questions about whether we could do this sooner as a sort of a tentpole pledge from the UK to finish the job, I suppose, on decarbonising the power sector. And my response to that was that there isn't any particular reason why you couldn't do it earlier than 2035, except that the set of institutions and rules and systems that we have, particularly around consenting and planning and permitting, prevents that happening more quickly. And the Labour Party, which is now the government in the UK, in opposition, decided to make that really their key climate pledge, their key pledge for driving the transition in the energy sector, and their key offer, I think, particularly in a forum like this, an international forum, on what the UK is now trying to lead. So here we are today. We're now several months after the election of that new government. This week in COP, we had the Prime Minister come along and pledge a new emissions target at the NDC, as it's known, for 2035, which was drawn on the same path as the ones that I've just referred to from the work that we did in the CCC. So that 81% reduction by 2035 is now our country's pledge, alongside the 68% reduction NDC that has already been set for 2030. Both of those targets are consistent with the path that the country needs to take to net zero by the middle of the century. But it's very interesting, the Prime Minister made that pledge on the main stage here at the COP and then moved swiftly on to talking about clean power by 2030 as one of the ways in which we are going to continue to show our leadership on this energy transition. And he was able to tell an important story that just a few months ago we closed, a few weeks ago actually, that we closed the very final coal-fired power station in the UK. And that is, you know, an important event. We celebrated actually the contribution of the workers in the coal sector at the point when we closed that coal-fired power station. One of the most notable features of the closure of coal is that it has largely been achieved without huge social unrest. We've managed to take the workforce along with us. And we now have a power system that is increasingly dominated by, and will be increasingly dominated by, renewable power being the primary source of electricity. But that is only possible at the moment because we have the gas fleet that we have in the UK. So between a third and 40% of the electricity that we produce today in the UK is still coming from gas, and that's because gas is such an important complement to the renewables fleet that we're now increasingly building out, alongside our existing nuclear. We have plans for new nuclear, some of which we hope will be on by 2030, but really the new nuclear stories after 2030. So my job, coming to the job that I've taken on to lead the Clean Power mission by 2030, is to push us as quickly as we can by the end of this decade to the point where we are able to use more and more of that renewable power that we plan to build out at more and more scale, a faster and faster scale, using in particular the contract for difference mechanism that we've pioneered in the UK. And we will not be able to do that unless we are able to do two things. Firstly, we've got to continue to build out our grid. So one of the biggest challenges in the UK is that we have not built grid at the scale that's been required now for several decades, and have to move now much more quickly to reinforce the existing networks and build some new networks, most notably in the seas around Britain, to take power from the north, where the wind is, to the south, where the demand is. So we are going to green light that project. We're going to push that as quickly as we can so that we reinforce our network and allow it then to be connected to the second of our challenges, which is that we're going to have to connect a lot of new generation at a scale that we haven't really ever done before, in particular offshore wind, but also onshore wind and solar. And we're going to try and do that through the CFD mechanism that I spoke about, probably at more than double the capacities that we've ever successfully managed to contract through the CFD in previous years, particularly for offshore wind. We're doing that because, of course, we want to clean up the power system, but we are mainly doing that because we think that that is also the route through to lower bills for the consumer and for new supply chains to grow in the UK. So these really important benefits that come from that transition. My very final point to make on this is that if you want all that to happen, you've also got to do a few other things. The first thing is we cannot forget that the reason that the gas fleet is so useful to us is because it provides flexibility. So that gas fleet will continue to be there, I hope, into the 2030s, providing that reserve capacity flexibility that I talked about. But we also want to bring onto the system more long-duration energy storage and low-carbon flexibility, probably in the form of the traditional pumped hydro that we've got a lot of in the UK already, but we want to have more of that. But also new forms of energy storage that are providing that flexibility on the supply side, alongside demand flexibility to use that power when it's available, particularly giving the right signals to consumers. And all of that is a very exciting future that I do believe we can demonstrate will show bills falling over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. And a potentially quite a substantial fall in bills if we're able to do the package of reforms that I hope we'll be able to accompany with these infrastructure improvements. But back to my earlier story, if we want all of that to work, the principal challenge that I face in running this mission is not constructing new policies to encourage decarbonised electricity production. It is to encourage infrastructure to be built much more quickly in this country, in the UK, than we have ever achieved in the last few decades. I spoke at a dinner last night and I reflected on that coal-fired power station that we closed in Nottingham in the UK in the last few weeks. That coal-fired station was consented and permitted in 3 months. We now face a situation where some of the infrastructure projects that we are constructing in the UK are taking between 10 and 20 years to develop. So the biggest challenge that we face is not actually pioneering new approaches to decarbonisation policies, it's simply getting that system of permitting and planning to work more quickly. And that is a challenge that you find in the energy sector particularly, and the mission is about driving energy transition much more quickly. But it is also a challenge for infrastructure beyond energy, and for our house building targets and a host of other challenges that we have in the UK. So the Prime Minister's challenge to me is that we've got to get this stuff constructed and see the benefits to the UK economy and the benefits to UK consumers more quickly than we have in the past. And in a sense, we are now setting aside our decarbonisation objectives. Instead, that is a given. We've all got to do that. Every country's got to decarbonise. The challenge for us is to push to the benefits in terms of jobs, supply chain, and lower costs of energy more quickly than we've ever done before by building stuff more quickly than we've ever done before. So the mission I face is that, and that's the job that we've taken on. And I think, interestingly, if you look through the pipeline of projects that we have in the UK, we have enough in the pipeline to achieve clean power by 2030, adopting that definition, which we'll hear for in just a second, that the NESO have given us, which allows us to look to a future where where 95% of electricity is clean. We reduce our use of gas to less than 5% of the total in any 1 year. I think that's achievable by 2030, as long as we can clear away those barriers to development. And that is my task, so I'm very happy to take it on. So thanks, Tanya.
Thank you very much, Chris. Craig, let me pass on to you to explain to everyone who the NESO is, and also to talk us through some of that advice that Chris mentioned.
So, hello everybody, so my name's Craig Dykes, I'm Executive Director of System Operations, National Energy System Operator, and today is our 45th day birthday. 46 days ago we were part of National Grid Group, we're now independently owned government body with two main tasks. So the main task is what we did before, which is ultimately about keeping Great Britain's lights on, which is my day job, which is why I look 47, I'm actually 27, just to get that out there. But the new key bit is actually about setting out whole energy strategies in gas, electricity, hydrogen, carbon, markets, networks, regulatory frameworks. What does it all need to look like? So ultimately you're at that fine end goal, which is 2050, but you do it in the least cost way across all different fuel types. One other role we have is we have an advisory role to government. And Chris and the Secretary of State kindly wrote to us in August and asked us to do a little bit of work in a very short space of time, Chris, which culminated with 2 weeks ago, we published our Clean Power 2030 report. And effectively, we were asked to look at, right, what can we do in the next 5 years, or just over 5 years, that means we can hit the clean power sector by 2030. So we did it in about 12 weeks. It's a technical report, but as I said yesterday, it's probably the most non-technical technical report we've ever written. So there's not one mention of a megabar or reactive power or horses and cars in it at all. But we can talk about that in a very separate conversation if you want that. It brought out some of the key bits which we knew already, i.e. the network plans are there already, we just need to make them happen. The market development, the way markets develop in GB are of such that they will attract new investment. And why we know that, if I extrapolate forward to 2035, so we moved from a peak demand today of just under 50 gigawatts to probably 120 to 130 gigawatts in 2035. We have over 800 gigawatts of capacity sat there in the queue waiting to connect, and it's not going anywhere. So there are people sat there with money looking to invest in the GB market. So we know there is investment there ready to go. You just need to, I guess, unlock the gates and make it all happen. But we also looked at technology. Clearly it's only 5 years away, really picking on the technology that's well established. How can you bring more of it to market? And good examples there, we look at things as 22 to 27 gigawatts of battery storage, 5 to 8 gigawatts of long duration energy storage, up to 50 gigawatts of offshore wind. So it's well-proven technology, where the economics of it all has fallen away. We know it can be delivered in the next 5 years. Ultimately then, there's a key bit we've got to think about is the communities as well. Because it's okay having a big national picture. How do you get the community to be part of it? How do you engage communities to allow the consenting to happen, back to Chris's point? Because that's probably one of the biggest barriers. How do you get this stuff built and away, but it's publicly acceptable to the local communities, which is absolutely key. One thing we must not take our eye off. And then clearly you've got supply chain factors as well. So making sure that the signals are there for manufacturers to build the plants, to build the factories, but also train up the key skilled workers that they are going to need to populate the factories and build the stuff, which is the same key skilled workers that we'll be going after, National Grid will be going after, SSE will be going after. So how do you create that big, vast pool of individuals that can actually drive the whole thing? Because ultimately, money's needed, but also you need people behind it as well. Then the key money bits, I think, is some of the key stats we have. So network investment over the next 5 years will be £60 billion. That's £12 billion of network investment every year for 5 years. The total expenditure every year for 5 years across networks, markets and everything else is £40 billion. That's £200 billion across the next 5 years. What's really important to say, through the analysis we've done, actually is have minimal impact on consumer bills because the cost is already baked in. So actually from a consumer perspective, actually they will not feel much pain in the bills. And ultimately this is about delinking costs of wholesale energy in GB from gas to renewables, therefore the cost of wholesale should drop, so therefore there should be a drop in what they see in regards to what they're paying for energy. But then a little bit then to what Chris was saying, it's okay encouraging the investment, but ultimately should the bill payer actually pay for all this themselves? And ultimately the answer should be no. Therefore there needs to be really strong partnerships between private sector and public contracts to make this actually happen so it's least cost for consumer. And I guess that's the key bit as well. And I guess that's a conversation, my final point. I guess a final open question, how do we mobilize that capital investment with new financial instruments that may or may not exist today? I guess my open question, and I'll close there.
Thank you very much, Craig, and a great question to end on, particularly given that this COP is also so focused on the mobilisation of finance. Martin, let me come to you to give a perspective from SSE and how you're also interacting with this 2030 mission.
Thanks, Tanya, and thanks to Chris in particular for opening, but also the remarks there. I guess, SSE, just very, very quickly, we're a vertically integrated energy company, mostly in the UK and Ireland, and we've been building out renewables for many, many years, but we're very busy building out the transmission that's just been talked about now to try and get a bunch of those renewables to market. I guess our perspective, Tanya, is if you take a step back, the UK has really benefited from really good, positive, progressive policy over many years. So if you go back to the start of the EMR, the introduction of ROCs, CFDs, capacity mechanism to make sure system security could be guaranteed, these were really far-sighted policies. And not only were they far-sighted policies, they were policies that the government built in a bunch of pragmatism into. So when things didn't quite work out as we all expected, those policies could be slightly adjusted to get the required outcome. And it's those basic policies that have allowed a massive uptake of offshore and onshore wind and the final closure of coal that Chris referred to. That's all been enabled by very good, strong policy direction. Chris is right, though. I mean, right now in the UK, it's a cold day in the UK today. The UK continues, like Europe, to suffer from Dunkelflaute, and as a result, every single one of our gas stations is on and generating right now. As I suspect, I don't know what the numbers are, but I suspect 25 gigawatts of gas is running in the UK right now. So we know that we still haven't done it all, and there's a lot to go at. Despite good policy, we still have a lot of things we need to do to get renewables to market. Chris also referred to the time it takes to do things. We've definitely found that. The wind farm that Chris has referred to is our wind farm, Viking Wind Farm. That took us 20 years to get from original inception of the idea to generate this summer. It only took about 2.5 years to build it, so 17.5 years of planning, etc. We have Berwick Bank, which is a 4 gigawatt offshore wind farm, which we are very, very keen to build, and I think hopefully Chris would agree would be pretty important to a net zero a target mission by 2030, which has been held up in planning for the last 2 years. I personally have been involved in carbon capture at Peterhead for about 15 to 16 years now. It might actually be me that's the problem, actually. That's maybe why it's not been built. But again, this is something that we think is just so strategically inevitable and in the country's interest. It's probably slightly frustrating it's taken that long to get to this point where we still are in the process of waiting for a contract which can unlock it. But I'm not negative about it. I'm naturally an optimist, and I do think all of this stuff can be sped up, and I think Chris's running of this mission is incredibly important to that. The evidence I would give you is transmission. Our transmission business 3 or 4 years ago was probably one of the smaller businesses within SSE. It had 450 people, maybe annual capex of £300 million. Today it's probably doing 10 times that capex, and the workforce is up at over 2,000 people, and that is as it tries to build out with National Grid and with Scottish Power the grid that effectively moves that renewable south. And the speed of that and that growth has been unlocked essentially by very strong regulatory direction, strategic oversight and a strategic ambition, which has enabled a few things. Firstly, the investment to come, and secondly, the supply chain in particular to believe the investment is coming, and therefore to start thinking about how it can deliver to that. And that's been incredibly important. That is why the mission that Chris is leading is so crucial, and why we would see the value of it, because we can see it right now in terms of what we're doing and for the country as a whole. 2 quick final points, if I may. Stability is really important. Our investors will look for us to show policy stability before necessarily being welcoming of big let's say R&D bets or innovation interventions, or even trying to do first-of-a-kind technologies. The permission we get from our investors to invest in carbon capture, to invest in far-sighted hydrogen technologies, or indeed pump storage, which both speakers have referred to, is based upon a policy belief that government will follow through with that, and it is very, very important that government keeps that articulation out there. And then equally, if you're going to take first-of-a-kind risk, if you are going to take some of this DevEx risk, you also need the supply chain to believe the UK is the place that's going to do it. And the moment we slightly wobble on that, then the supply chain might look elsewhere or might not have quite the same confidence. And that's incredibly important if we want to deliver the flexible, low-carbon generation technologies that we're going to need going forward. So my conclusion is, I think it's an incredibly exciting time to be in energy. It's an incredibly exciting time to be in the UK doing energy. I don't think any of us underestimate the scale of the ambition. I really liked what was in the NESO report. I'm really paraphrasing and not doing your report justice here, Craig, so apologies. But you talked in the report about aiming high, the lack of strategic regret of going fast, and also the very positive impact on consumer bills in the medium term if we do all of that. That is the importance of the mission from our perspective, and the fact that the UK can take global leadership on this scale as well has got to be pretty critical as well. I'll leave my opening remarks there, Tanya.
Thank you very much, Martin. Now, since we've heard a lot about the UK perspective, just going to now open up the discussion for the next 20 minutes across the table to give everyone's reflections and perspectives. And after that, for those in the audience, we'll be coming to the audience for a few questions at the end as well. But I wanted to open the floor first for contributions, just to give a different international perspective on the mission that we have in the UK, but also how are other countries approaching clean power in their own jurisdictions. Chris, if you want to go first, and then Ellen, maybe after you can go.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this event. I'm Ellen, I'm from Statkraft, and Statkraft is a Norwegian company but has business globally and is the largest renewable company in Europe. We're also present in the UK, also in storage. Thank you for interesting introductions, and as a Norwegian I'd like to congratulate the UK on the new climate target for 2035. It's a good example for other countries. I agree to many of the things that have been said here. Our analysis shows that the energy transition is unstoppable, but it may be delayed and may not be fast enough. And to speed the transition up, many things have already been mentioned, but permitting is of course important to actually have access to necessary areas. At the same time, it needs to be done in a way that does not prevent public acceptance. Many have experienced that might be delaying projects significantly as well. And also the rights of indigenous people is an experience that we have from Norway and that are important. But you still need to speed up processes, but at the same time also be able to have acceptance and also making sure other sustainability goals are sort of taken care of. So from a policy side, I think the most important thing is to make sure that we have the needed infrastructure, both the physical infrastructure that has been mentioned, but also the regulatory. And as has been said, it needs to sort of be predictable so that you decrease uncertainty and decrease policy risk as much as possible in a situation where we're in a huge transition. And in our view, it is the energy transition is basically for a large part now market-driven by that it is actually cost, it's profitable, but it doesn't go fast enough. So again, to speed up processes. And of course also carbon pricing and preferably predictable and increasing carbon pricing is very important. And then also for newer technologies, offshore, wind, etc., also support in different forms is necessary. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. It's really interesting to hear the different views. The energy transition, I agree, is completely unstoppable, and that's brilliant. We in Centrica, we supply 1 in 3 homes in the UK with something 1 in 4 homes in Ireland. Both Craig and Chris mentioned that we will see bills coming down, and I would love to see that, but I'm really worried that there's no evidence that that's going to happen. And if you look, for example, the recent auction round for renewables in the UK, the prices are higher than the current electricity prices, and the very inconvenient situation is that gas-fired generation today is cheaper than offshore wind. And because we give contracts for another 15 years, that will probably remain the case. And so I wonder how we make the case for consumers. We think about everything from a consumer's point of view, and I worry that if we promise consumers that bills are coming down and they don't come down, then there are enough people that want to attack the energy transition that they use that as evidence, and they say, well, they've been lying to you because it doesn't happen. Now, decoupling electricity prices in the UK from international gas prices will reduce volatility, but there's no evidence they'll actually reduce prices, and if anything, they will probably increase prices because the energy transition is not cheap because we don't price carbon properly. If we priced carbon properly, then the energy transition would be a reduction in cost. So I think there's something that we have to come towards, which is we have to stop telling people that this is going to bring down prices, because it's probably not. We have to also help people understand that decoupling from gas is good for volatility, but it won't reduce the price, because I really do fear that at some point consumers will start to push back against the energy transition and will use these things that are very convenient but not backed up by fact as the reason to back away from, or the reason to support attacks on the energy transition. So I do worry about that, but I think if we think about it, we always think from the customer. And it's very easy if we think about, if we construct power stations, wind farms, whatever, cables, networks, that we always think about the engineering, we think about the planning, but the reality is if the consumer doesn't support this, then it's going to be more difficult.
Thank you, and very interesting views from everyone, and I appreciate that perspective as well. I'm Nick from DP World, so we're responsible for around 11% of global trade, so I look after sustainability in Europe. And the way we're viewing this is a combination of both things that we can do within our facilities and things that we can work with the grid and with governments. So very recently I updated our task force for climate-related financial disclosures within Europe. Wanted to go and have a look and see what the big risks, both physical and transition, was for us. One of the things I discovered that the business wasn't quite aware of was the energy crisis throughout Europe for many of our sites. Some of our warehouse locations where we serve customers with server racks and we assemble them and then test them, these server racks are dragging more and more energy, particularly the new AI ones. And we now have to be very careful how many we turn on at a time, because the grid capacity in some of these countries, there is simply nothing left to pull through. The planning requirements for them, it's very similar to the UK, can be 6, 7, 8 years before you're able to do that. And we have big problems of companies near us planning, say, yes, we need this much energy, but not actually knowing if they're going to need it, and then delaying or changing, and then you're never able to get the timeline move forward. So I think first of all, the point on planning is absolutely spot on. You know, we need to accelerate those timelines from 20 years down to 2 years for these sorts of things. I think the other aspect of it as well is we need to think about how businesses like DP World, which has a lot of real estate, a lot of roof space, we can integrate microgrids within our locations that are a two-way service for both the national grid, but also to think about how we serve the local community at the same time. And we are in all of our places because of our communities are nearby, the towns that we serve, and we want to make sure they benefit from the energy and the cost reductions that we can bring from investment there as well. So I would say from a public partnership perspective, you know, we businesses and government and the energy companies need to look at all that opportunity of space and integration that we have.
Thank you very much, both. I just wanted to give a moment, Martin, from your perspective, we've had 2 interventions there that focuses on consumers, and this point, Chris, actually it's universal globally, the thoughts of, you know, are prices going to come down, and how do you actually talk about the opportunities of this energy transition, bills being one of those. Martin, do you have any reflections? And then, Nick, I thought I might come to you to talk about the question that Craig put out to us on the mobilisation of private finance.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I agree with Chris. It's very important that we do deliver a lower consumer price at the end of this. I mean, just a couple of thoughts. Firstly, on carbon price, I completely agree. You need a strong, stable, robust carbon price. The UK is running at a lower level than the EU for reasons we probably all understand for now. And actually, I think if we're on an EU carbon price, I'm not so sure it would be more expensive than offshore wind right now. So maybe our view is probably that equalises over time because of CBAMs and the need to do that. Just the other thing, just is slightly anecdotal, but interesting what people think. The offshore wind auction obviously has cleared materially higher. I don't think anybody's disagreeing with that. Interestingly, we built a new gas station 4 years ago at Keadby. It cost about £350 million. If we were going to try and procure and build that power station today, you're looking at least twice that number, but probably higher. And so all I'm trying to say is supply chain generally has gone up. And for me, and it'd be interesting what Craig thinks, 35 gigawatts of aging CCGTs are going to have to be replaced at some point, whether that's 2032, I don't know. I mean, it depends how well we've all looked after them. But equally, they're going to have to be replaced from a net zero perspective. And then these aren't necessarily cheap technologies, so we're going to incur a cost anyway. And that counterfactual and getting that honestly described to customers, I really agree with that, but I'm probably a little bit more positive on the end dynamics for consumers.
Yeah, Doddy, don't get me wrong, it's not that I'm negative, and it's not that I'm saying it's not cheaper than the alternative. What I'm saying is not cheaper than the current situation, and that's the thing we've got to be really careful about. If we're telling people your bills are coming down, they expect them to go down from today's level. If we're telling them they're cheaper than they would otherwise be, that's a very different message. So for me, it's about getting the messaging right rather than arguing that we shouldn't be doing it. We absolutely should. We've just got to be careful.
So, Nick from Barclays, I'm not sure I'm going to better answer your question fully, but I'll give a sense of it. So we've been fully committed to the transition, and good examples, tangible examples of that very recently is we've just funded the grids upgrade, the 7 billion upgrade that we've managed to do, but also, in addition to that, the Murray West offshore wind fund, which will actually bring in about 50% of Scotland's power needs over the course of this next decade. So there are a couple of very tangible examples of where we can mobilise finance. We're also excited by the UK National Wealth Fund, which I think that public-private partnership is going to be critical. And a good example of that is we were first out of the blocks a few weeks ago with a £500 million fund to help retrofit what will end up being around 30,000 social houses through that fund. So there are sort of various ways that we can definitely mobilise finance using existing instruments, but also thinking creatively around the development of new instruments as well. I just wanted to, can I just, as I've got the microphone, just sort of make one further sort of point, which is slightly unrelated, but critical, I think, and that is around the jobs that are required and also the supply chain. And thinking about the role of SMEs in the UK around that too. At the moment, certainly in the surveys that we've done, SMEs see the transition to net zero as an obligation, not a commercial opportunity. And I think we have to try and change the lens on that, help them with changing the lens on that. But I think the way to do that is through some of these sort of very large-scale projects where there can be a role for SMEs in the UK, but they need to be clear what part and role they can play. And then I think they will lean into that. We're increasingly starting to talk about SMEs are keen on net profit, but they want also to deliver on net zero. How can you get an alignment between net profit and net zero?
Thank you very much, Nick. John, I was actually going to come to you, actually, because we've talked a lot about energy system and transmission and grid. But looking at technologies that need to come and investing in those large infrastructure projects, how are you seeing sort of public-private partnerships feature there?
Well, I think when Martin started describing carbon capture and it's at Aker carbon capture, or what is now called SLB capture, we were actually the first to capture CO2 at the Logandet power station very long time ago. And we were also supporting SSE on the Kidby 3 project and trying to mature carbon capture in the UK. And I think I wanted to maybe touch upon a point which shouldn't be underestimated, which Martin also mentioned, and that's supply chain comfort. And we look at this from a little bit, not just a UK perspective, but also around the world. Where do we see project actually moving forward with carbon capture specifically, or with large-scale capex project in general? And one of the things that we should take learnings from is maybe countries like Saudi Arabia, where the government steps in on a very different scale to manage some of the risks of these projects. Because I couldn't agree more. Every time we look at the estimates that comes out of some of these large feeds that we've done, they've been going up. But one of the feedback we get from the supply chain is, of course, that the risks that are imposed from the UK government is quite significant. And the price of risk is becoming very high. And some of the EPCs that we've been working with are quite reluctant to take on these risks without a very high risk premium. And that makes these projects extremely expensive. So not only are they difficult to permit, but they're also very difficult to see the business case, even with the business models that we see in the UK, which are well formed. So I think there are lessons learned from around the world how you can approach large scale projects like this in order to manage some of that supply chain comfort. Because generally speaking, if you ask around, in Europe in general, to an EPC and saying where do you least want to make a fixed price project or a turnkey project, the answer is very fast going to be the UK.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Steve Smith, National Grid. I just wanted to come back on Chris's point, because I do think it's really important, and probably the other bit that was missing in terms of not over-promising on price is just recognising the starting point, which is sadly the UK has probably the highest power prices, industrial and residential, amongst the G20. So it's even more important that we don't over-promise and then under-deliver. But the flip side of that, I think, if we're talking about missions and thinking about this, we need to be much hungrier for innovation. So take what we do, which is grids. There's a whole bunch of technologies coming through, meaning we don't always have to build more infrastructure at more cost. There's lots more we can do with the technology and the grids we do have. And so I think there's a real need in this that we all tend to run to big new engineering solutions. Let's go and build new things. But there should be a relentless focus. And I think this is on us as the transmission companies, on NESO, but also on regulators to say, costs $4 billion to run this system every year at the moment. That's a big number to go after that could help. So I think there's a real sense of let's not just think about all the things we need to build. Let's think about some of what we've got and how we could apply technology and incentives to really drive some costs down, because Chris is absolutely right. Just saying it's going to be cheaper won't make it happen. That's part of our mission to deliver.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lindy Fersman from the Tony Blair Institute. I'm the Director for Climate and Energy Policy there. Just wanted to make 3 points, I guess. I think we all know that the current regulatory and policy settings are not, they don't really enable the proliferation of infrastructure. And I would also agree that they don't necessarily enable innovation. So the alignment of policy and funding and regulation and market incentives are going to be key, not only for certainty for investment, but also for the speed that we can deliver this mission. And I guess, I guess one of the barriers, I think, once we've got those things aligned, is the political economy in which these decisions are taking place. Evidence is obviously part of it. Actually evidence around the costs, evidence of the practical plans that will deliver this, but also the messaging. We've talked in climate a lot about green jobs. I don't think people believe there are green jobs. They don't necessarily want green jobs. They just want jobs, actually. And it's similar, re the costs. People are still seeing this as a cost that they have to bear, the transition generally, and it is that'll slow down the pace, I think. We did some research. We surveyed people right across Europe a few months ago, and we found that, across the transition, people did not believe that countries were going to meet their targets. They did not believe that businesses were going to meet their targets, and it was that made them unwilling to bear any additional costs themselves. And then thirdly, I just wanted to pick up Nick's point, although he's now gone, around the alignment of profit and net zero. In the countries that we work in, and we've seen really that as soon as you put economic growth or profit as oppositional to climate always loses. So the integration of the transition and this mission in particular into economic strategy and fiscal and economic structural policy, I think, is going to be critical to really enable this mission and our other climate goals as well. Thanks.
Okay, good morning from me. Very happy and excited to be in this table with so much UK leadership. I think before I go into the detailed stuff, just to say that at this COP you would have noticed, I'm not going to talk politics here, but there's a significant vacuum when it comes to international leadership, and I think the UK is very strategically well placed to fill in that vacuum, and I'm very glad that we're having these sort of conversations that can then have their own ripples across the world with regards to climate change. My name is Angelos Pastas. I also work for a Norwegian company called DNV. In a previous life, I worked for a developer called Statera Energy. I've been involved with 3 out of the 4 gigawatts of battery storage in the UK, civil engineering background and a project manager by experience. I want to come back on the planning point a little bit and the key word that was used by John on risk, because I think an expensive risk or a high risk is a risk that is not very well understood, and that's where the private sector can probably help the public sector accelerate their processes and procedures. From my experience, there's a big demand in local planning authorities and generally public bodies to be taught, to be led by example by the private sector around how to manage the risks that they face, because I think the higher the ambition, the higher the perceived risk, but perceived is the key word there. There's a lot of work that we can do together at that interface, at that front line of project development between private and public sector to work together and make sure that these big projects happen. First of all, these are crucial, 35 gigawatts of CCGT to be decommissioned, like you said, but also the smaller projects like mini-grids, rooftop solar, they're all key components to the transition of the UK. So I think from my perspective as a consultant now, having left the tools and side behind, that's where at least one keystone change I can see happening. Local planning authorities working with consultants, working with technical due diligence providers, whoever it might be, to understand projects better, see how we can reduce or replace risk, and then get the projects into implementation down the line. Thank you.
Thanks. So Anthony Abbott's representing NKT. So we're an international cable manufacturer and installer of cables, headquarters in Denmark, but a number of operations across Europe, including the UK. Recently installed or finished installing the 320 kV interconnector from the Shetland Islands to the mainland, bringing 600 megawatts of renewable energy to the UK. Very excited to be part of that project, and as a company, very interested to continue in the UK, and great to see the ambition level up to 2035. I think couple of comments. The first one around risk. We've heard it in different ways. I think, Doug, you mentioned signals, clear signals from the market. I think, Martin, you talked about confidence, and that's key for a manufacturer like us to have a sense of comfort that this is going to happen and that we're going to implement. To give you an example, we recently made a decision to invest €1 billion in the expansion of our factory in Sweden. So it's a third cable tower, and that will also include an extra cable laying vessel. So that will mean then we'll have 2 cable laying vessels. The one, Victoria, used in the Shetlands project, and that was on the back of commitments. So that was back on the back of commitments together with customers, saying this is the capacity that we need to deliver on installing these cables, and because of that, we felt the risk was low enough to make that decision, to make that investment. And going forward, that's what we're looking for in the UK. We're looking for a sense of comfort that this is going to happen. But at the same time, and this is my second key message, at the same time, we need to understand the rules of the game, because the rules of the game, they vary. If we're operating in Norway, Statkraft, Ellen, you mentioned sustainability requirements now in your tenders. you require that 30% of the weighting goes towards sustainability, which we think is great, because at the end of the day, we need to have focus on things like biodiversity. We put a lot of effort in the Shetlands project on minimising impacts on biodiversity, and we need to make sure that whilst we're looking at cost effectiveness, we're not compromising on the other negative or potential negative sustainability and impact. So the rules of the game, what is it? Sustainability? Is it cost effectiveness? Is it energy security? Is it resilience? Is it jobs in the local communities? It's important for us as a manufacturer when working in different jurisdictions to understand what they are.
Thank you very much. We've got just a few minutes. I wanted to open up to the floor before passing on to Chris to come back to some of the comments that we've had across the table. I think we've probably got time for maybe one or two questions. Maybe take them together and then we can...
Thank you so much. So my question is about granularity. We've talked a lot about large-scale enterprises, offshore wind farms, reinforcing the grid and so on. But mention was rightly made, I think, of the potential for, huge potential for buildings integrated renewables, solar, mini grids. So to what extent will the mission be supporting the maximization of the generation of green electrons within the urban space? And secondly, heat. Heat electrification is going to be a highly granular process, and it's going to involve addressing the kind of market blockages that have prevented us from having in the UK the installation rates of air source heat pumps that we've seen in France and Germany, and the massive failure that we've had, I would argue, for 50 years on energy efficiency. We're talking about costs. Unless we address energy efficiency in our buildings as a matter of utmost priority, then the costs are going to be stratospheric.
Thank you. And one more.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Deborah Greaves. I'm at the University of Plymouth and I lead the Supergen Offshore Renewable Energy Hub, which is a research programme in the UK. With very large reach, we have 72 universities in the UK involved, and we fund research. We have 40 projects with 74 industry partners involved in those. I just wanted to make the point that research and innovation is a key part of all of this. So we're talking about shortening consenting and planning times. We need to use the new technology, and we use evidence and knowledge and science in order to inform that speed up so that we do it in a safe way. Also, I want to make the point that we talk a lot about building enormous expansion of gigawatts in offshore wind, offshore wind. A lot of that's going to be floating, and that also needs an enormous amount of innovation and research behind it. The technology is not ready off the shelf, so we need to do a lot of work. And then the third thing I wanted to mention is around new areas. So particularly if we're thinking about floating offshore wind in new frontier sites like the Celtic Sea in the UK, there's investment for support for ports, there's supply chain development, there's an enormous potential for benefit for the local economy and social value generation, as well as biodiversity thinking. But that's not going to happen by chance, and I think we need to have a focused strategy in order to deliver that in areas like the Celtic Sea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chris, I'll let you come in to cover off that question.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks for the discussion as well. It's very good to hear many of the themes that we are focusing on. So to give you some reassurance, I don't think there's anything that we've heard around this table that we are not at least considering. I really do want to take on this question of bills that Chris raised, because I couldn't really agree more, really. I mean, we've got to tell the right story for this. But before we come to that, just a few observations on it, really. There was, I think, a misguided piece in the FT recently on the cost of electricity that the industrial users of electricity are facing, and I couldn't get to the price that they were modelling in 2023. I think it was a load of rubbish, actually, as a piece of analysis. We are nowhere near the highest prices in the G20. Nonetheless, I would like it to be lower. So the first thing to say here is that is an aim we should take. Most of the electricity that is consumed in the UK is consumed by industrial and commercial users, so we forget that too. We often jump to households, but the challenge is, the biggest challenge there is for our commercial users of electricity, we should bring down the price, because that will be a great attraction for the UK more generally. The fact that we, I think, can do that through clean energy is just an extra bonus. When we look at the challenge of clean power, it is a capex challenge principally. So we've got to do a lot of capital investment. There's no great surprise. Organisations like the one I used to lead, the one I'm now in now, have been making these arguments and cases for a long time. It's an investment challenge. Just looking at the capex number which Craig's organisation had provided for us, and Craig mentioned some of these, it's astonishing how much capex we need to do between now and 2030. What is equally astonishing is that I think we will do that capex. So we're talking about probably circa £200 billion of capital investment in the energy sector alone. Some of that, about 60, as Craig said, is in networks. The rest of it is probably in the generation side. If that is all just cost to the consumer, then we're sunk. So the story here that goes with that is that it is an investment in all meanings of that word. It would and will and should bring down the wholesale price of energy that the consumer is paying. That is where I think the other interesting part of the story is that there's a wider set of benefits that come with that capex. We've got to focus on getting the GDP multipliers that come from doing capex at that scale. So yes, it's about repatriating jobs to this country that are presently somewhere else because we're importing that energy from somewhere else. We have to try and extract greater supply chain advantage from that capex. I think we can. We've also got to be realistic that we're not going to be making all of the kit that we need for that energy system transition in the UK. So coming to a more realistic appraisal of what that actually means and making sure that we have there's a lot of rubbish spoken about skills policy through the ages. Here's an opportunity for us to actually have a skills pipeline that is delivering people to jobs, tens of thousands of jobs that we will need in that programme of work right across the country. We could just get focused on that and step away from the kind of 2050 skill set that we need and look at the skill set we need for 2026. So I think that's very exciting to look at those things. But coming back to this question of bills and whether they will fall, I want to take it on. I don't want to do this if we're not going to have a go at that, Chris. And I think we often look to our energy regulator to deliver the energy bills falls, and actually they don't really have the tools to do it. So I am very committed to using what policy levers we have in government to try and deliver a better outcome for consumers in the course of a single parliament. I think you're absolutely right, Chris. If we tell people that their bills are going to fall, they better bloody fall. So that is the Prime Minister's view on it too. I think it is important to say that yes, it is actually quite easy to tell a story about how costs have fallen versus a different reference case, but that doesn't mean anything to anyone. So I think taking that on is definitely part of this mission. And just to say that one of the key cost drivers of it, since this is so investment heavy, one of those key cost drivers is the cost of the capital for the investment. So we have lots of tools to try and bring that down, notably what we're doing with the planning regime to try and reduce some of the risk in the planning regime. We have other things in there too. The supply chain inflation that we talked about is something else that we want to try and avoid. So trying, making sure that we bring that in on time at low cost is a key part of keeping the cost low. But there are other tools there too. And this is probably not the forum to explore all of those, but we've got tools at our disposal. And most obvious of them is something I'm very much on record, which is that all of the policy costs of the transition so far sit on the electricity bill alone. And if we want to try and encourage people to use that electricity, that is definitely something we should be looking at. So we call that in the UK rebalancing of bills, which is euphemistic, but it essentially means doing something about the fact that all of those policy costs are on only one part of that bill. And Chris can speak to me later about what he thinks about what we should do about that, but that is a really important part of it. I think one of the other parts of it, coming to the question that Ashok and the audience asked, is that we can tell a better story about giving people the opportunity to save money through their electricity bill if they're using it off-peak. And that is a really important part of this too. The story of how we will reform our energy market at the retail end is really important. And Ashok, your question about community energy, local energy, micro-scale energy is part of that story of having a more flexible system in the round. But I don't mind saying that although it's part of the mission, I think it's at the edge of what I'm trying to do, because I am thinking at the largest possible scale about how we can get to a cleaner power system overall, because I don't think that most people will indulge in that kind of highly flexible future, because it does rest ultimately on you having a heat pump and an electric vehicle, and I don't think people will have that in the next 5 years in the main, as much as I would like that. So that story overall, I think we can paint a better story of a more flexible system where the opportunity to save money But the fundamental here is that we have to deliver lower bills, and we're going to have to think very seriously about how we do that very, very quickly.
Thanks very much, Chris. And if those emphatic remarks weren't enough to give you confidence on how we are going to be driving this mission in the UK, then I don't know what will. We are having to close the session now. I just wanted to give thanks to all of the participants around the table. It was very quick interventions, but it gives a sense of the challenge at hand that we have, that we are working across both the public and the private sector for the delivery of this mission, that some of those challenges that we've mentioned on planning, skills, supply chains, we're seeing globally as well. And so we do have a role in the UK to actually confront some of these challenges, and same on the communications of the story as well. That is also something universally that every economy is going to be facing. Martin, you rightly highlighted a great quote from the NISA report, which I highlighted in my notes. It's the lack of strategic regret of going fast that we're looking at in the importance of the mission. And that is what we want to show globally, and coming to COP sort of next year as well. We'll obviously look at the progress that we're making in the UK and have a similar discussion. Hopefully we've made some progress that we can share with colleagues across the world. Thank you very much for joining, for those watching as well. Please, quick note that there will be a QR code on the screen as well if you're able to give feedback on this event and the format as well. Thank you very much all.